I think one way that we can think about archetypes is that they're universal symbols, that they exist in the collective consciousness and may even have like a biological origin.
Yeah.
And these are ways of perceiving that all human beings are capable of, regardless of their culture or their language. So these are symbols like death, or like the wise old man, or the empress, things like that. You know, the kind of stuff that shows up on tarot cards, actually.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a strong argument for the possibility of archetypal symbology in all human beings, just like there seems to be some universal human emotions that are always kind of, as far as we know, experienced, but certainly expressed in the same way, regardless of people's culture or socialization. What have you done with respect to Jungian archetypes in your work, Rob?
Well, funnily enough, I just finished editing, it was yesterday morning or the day before, a new video that I haven't put out yet, which is on Carl Jung's quite short book called The Undiscovered Self. I read that for the first time recently, and it's only 79 pages, so took tons of notes and recorded that. Yeah, I mean, I've been aware of Carl Jung's stuff for a long time. I've read about his theories, but never read his books until recently. I think I'd read some of his papers before. And I think he's fantastic. He's absolutely brilliant. He was so ahead of the curve, and like the stuff that he was writing way back in the 1950s is absolutely relevant today. Yeah, so I mean, was there some specific aspect of Jung that you wanted to discuss?
Well, you've made a couple of videos on the shadow, and I think the shadow is really interesting because there are a few different ways that we can approach the idea of the shadow, both in Jungian psychology and in other forms of psychology. I think there are two general ways to approach it that I'm aware of, and you can correct me if you want to change the definition or if you have another idea. One is that the shadow is sort of the disavowed self. It's the part of myself that I don't allow myself to acknowledge. And so I deny and repress and see it in other people and want to destroy the projected evil that I perceive in others because I'm unwilling to accept it in myself. I think that is the more, let's say, Jungian approach to it. There's another idea about the shadow that basically says the shadow is kind of inescapable. Even if you were to do all of this deep personal, psychological work to kind of like understand your demons, as we say, to integrate your shadow, you still have a shadow. You can't get away from it because your shadow in this conceptualization is just the sum of all of your unchosen lives. That it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the path that you didn't take. And on some level, the shadow becomes even more dangerous to the individual when the unchosen path represents, let's say, greater happiness and prosperity than the one that you decided to take. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, so just trying to think there. So you're talking about the rejected part of ourselves.
Absolutely. That's so big in psycho.
I totally agree with that. And we project it onto others, and then we hate the other people who we project it onto. Absolutely. And I mean, Jung talked about that in terms of world affairs, wars and stuff. It's like he said, virtually all wars, it's just two sides, each projecting their own shadow onto the other side and then attacking it. So he talked about the mutual withdrawing of projections as a way of stopping war. Not an easy thing to persuade all the leaders to do, is it? And then the other one you mentioned, can you just clarify that for me a little bit again?
Yeah, rather than be like, so in the first definition, the things that I'm disavowing of myself are like my own capacity for cruelty, my own darkness, my own hatred, my own envy and selfishness. I'd prefer, I'd prefer to think of myself as all good, as righteous, as honest, as forthright. But like those darknesses live inside of me, and if I
can't get rid of them, they're always there.
Kind of can't.
They're built in into our it's in our nature, the way we grew up, and and the way we evolved. We had to fight, we had to fear, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's you can't get rid. You can become aware of the shadow, and lessen its effect on you so that you don't project so much, but you can't get rid of it. That's my understanding of it.
Yeah, and I think that the more that I do that shadow work myself and accept those parts of myself, I become more compassionate and patient with other people, because it's like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
when I see this in other people, I'm like, well, have I really done have I done something that bad myself in the past? Maybe I have. And if I haven't, could I? Yeah, I probably could. So you know, I don't want to give bad behavior a pass, but it is important that we can respond to bad behavior without necessarily needing to hate it or destroy it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's one part. The other part is that like think about this. Maybe there's an archetypal story. I can't think of one on the top of my head, but there's like two twin brothers, and one person takes the path of, I'm becoming a scholar and I'm working hard and I'm getting married and becoming a productive member of society. The other person takes the path of, I want a life of adventure and exploration and danger and like this intensity of life. Neither one is necessarily bad or wrong, but one is kind of the shadow of the other, because they couldn't take, you either take one path or the other. And on some level, that twin becomes the shadow of the other person, because they represent all of the way their life could have been, but they didn't choose. Does that make sense?
Okay. So all of the motivations, the desires that would have unpinned, that would have been the basis of that alternate life if it had happened, you go down a different path, but I guess you could say the edge for the path that you didn't go down, that edge is still there. You could refer to that as like the shadow.
Sure, because whenever we make a choice, we actually have to forbear every other decision out there. And so every decision requires the sacrifice. And that means like actually giving up a huge part of our lives and a huge part of our potentiality. It's like my best friend in high school, he right out of college went to law school and he got a corporate job and he bought a house and got married. And I was an actor and I was living this kind of life. And he would look at me sometimes and think, oh, Ryan, you're so free. You get to do kind of whatever you want. And I was like, yeah, but I'm broke and you got a nice house and a fancy car. So it's like we just represented the path that the other didn't take.
Okay, yeah. That's a lot of paths.
There is, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But so I think in that case, the shadow is more around like choice points. It's like, if I could, what would my life have been like if I didn't marry this person, or if I didn't become a doctor? But it's usually around really, or even that this tragedy didn't befall me. You know what I'm saying? That's a big one.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily about the negative. That's just another way of looking at it. But we can talk about either one of those definitions of the shadow or something else.
I think I get what you mean there. Yeah, I mean, it's the term shadow, because shadows are literally dark, implies that it's a negative nature to the shadow. But yeah, I definitely agree. There's either, whether you would call it the same shadow or whether we've got multiple shadows that come with us, and some are more positive, some are more negative. Yeah, but definitely I agree that there's an unconscious side of us that follows us that's full of positive things, definitely. Yeah, I definitely agree that's the case. I mean, whether you want to lump that in with the negative side and call it as one, or whether you can separate it out into different pieces, but we're getting into mathematical relationship comparisons there. So I don't think the words really can do it justice, can they?
They often can't. So I was bringing this up in the context of your analysis of a Full Metal Jacket. Do you want to talk about that, or do you want me to try?
Yeah, great. Yeah.
So what do you see as the role of the shadow in that film?
The main thing that I see is the split between the two halves of the movie, the first half and the second half. A lot of people don't like the second half of the movie, and this is quite interesting because Jung talked about that a lot of people don't like accessing their own unconscious. They don't want to be aware of their own shadow. It's uncomfortable, isn't it? So naturally they don't like the second half of Full Metal Jacket so much, because it gets into the Jungian shadow thing. And Kubrick did talk about Carl Jung in relation to Full Metal Jacket in interviews. He specifically said that he and the co-writer Michael Hare, who wrote the book called Dispatches, which Full Metal Jacket takes many of its scenes from. Kubrick said that he and Michael Herr were specifically talking about ways of getting Jung's The Shadow into Full Metal Jacket. So, I mean, you know, never mind all the secrecy that with 2001 Space Odyssey, Kubrick was pretty open about putting Jungian shadow concepts into Full Metal Jacket. It's not so obvious when you watch the movie because nobody tells you except for that one moment when the Joker character is talking to, I think it's a colonel or some high-ranking officer, and the officer demands to know from him, why have you got a peace symbol on your jacket and you've got Born to Kill written on your helmet? And Joker says, I was trying to make a comment about the duality of man, the Jungian thing. You know, that's quite a blatant giveaway for Kubrick. I mean, he's not normally that blatant, but, you know, he slipped it in there. So, yeah, but for me, the overall split that happens in that movie is between the first and second half. And the way I view it is that the recruits in the first half of the movie, they are shadowed in the second half of the movie. Those recruits in the first half are reborn as the Lust Hog Squad in the second half of the movie. I did have a video up there. In fact, it's still up about Full Metal Jacket called, it was about the Private Pile character. Born Again Hard, I think I called the video. Just a 7 minute.
I watched that one a few days ago. I thought that was really insightful.
Yeah. So you know the basic point where Private Pile, his death is symbolic in the toilets in the first half of the movie. That's like killing off the innocent child. He's like a baby-like innocent character, and in the military training, they want to kill that off. They want to get rid of your innocence and your childishness and just turn you into a man. I mean, they literally call you, we're going to turn you into a man. That's standard jargon in, you know, military training. So they want to get rid of the infant. So he gets killed off symbolically in the first half, and then he comes back in the second half. His shadow is the character called Animal Mother. And if you watch the two characters, they have similar facial expressions, similar height and build. One's fat and the other one's suddenly become lean. And yeah, so that's your shadow at work right there. But neither of them is aware of the other. Animal Mother never ever makes any reference to the first half of the movie. In fact, in the second half of the movie, nobody talks about the first half of the movie at all. The cowboy character shows up in the second half and Joker meets up with him. But it's like the first half of the movie didn't even exist. I think that freaked people out in watching Full Metal Jacket. It's like you're watching two separate movies. And I think it was like two hemispheres of the brain separated, you know. But it's not just Animal Mother who that happens with. Lots of the other characters in the first half of the movie appear to be reborn in the second half. So you've got Private Snowball, which is the black character in the first half. He becomes Private 8-Ball in the second half, and he gets killed later. And yeah, so that's the way I look at it, is that the squad is reborn as their Jungian shadows in Vietnam, and the military has split their psyche so that they become somebody else, and they can't even remember who the hell they were when they started the basic training.